React Query is a super cool library that a lot of people talk about, and they slowly transition from example Redux or something to use React Query instead. So I'm going to show you how to refactor an application to use React Query. And the application is going to be, yet again, my cool little movie application that I create in my React Essentials course. So that's the one I'm going to use. So we have this movie application and I grab data from the movie database API. And that's what I'm going to use React Query for. And I'm going to use the next version of React Query. It's the version 3 and it hasn't been released yet. So I'm going to use the beta version. But it's better to show you that one because it's soon going to be released and I changed some stuff in it. So that's what I'm going to do. So first of all, let's go inside of the terminal and grab that library. Just making sure that I have the right tab here. I think it's this one. So I break this one and then I'm going to do an npm I react-query and then at beta, and that will grab the latest beta version. That went well. So we have React Query installed so we can use it. And React Query is a great library made by Tanner Linsley. And it's essentially a collection of hooks that will do everything for you when you fetch async data. I think it's mostly used with REST APIs because it has a similar API to, for example, Apollo that you can use for GraphQL endpoints. So it will handle everything for you from loading states, arrow states, and also it will cache everything for you. And that's super sweet. You don't have to build all that logic yourself. So that's why you want to use React Query. It's super simple to use. Hopefully, I'm going to show you that now. So I'm going to start up my dev environment again, npm start, and then go inside of my code editor. And something that's changed for version 3 is that you have to create a provider and actually provide your application with a query client. So that's what we have to do first. So inside my app component, I have my route set up, and this is kind of the main component for my application. So I want to have this high up in the hierarchy so my complete application can use React Query and create queries and stuff like that. So the first thing we do up here is to import some stuff. I mark it with React Query. I always like to mark it like this on my import so it's easy to find. So I import something that's called Query Client, capital Q and capital C. And also I need something that's called Query Client Provider. And I'm going to grab it from React-Query. Like this. And I can also show you here before I move on that this application uses my custom hooks to fetch data. You can see I have all this logic here. I have my loading state, my arrow state and stuff like that. And I grab it here inside of this hook. So it's quite a lot of code. This is for the home page and this is for the individual movie page. So these hooks are going to be removed and that's why we're going to use React Query instead. And I want to show you that you can remove a lot of this logic because React Query will take care of that for you. So that's what my goal is here, to remove those hooks and use React Query instead. All right, so back to the app component. I imported the query client and the query client provider. So from these ones, somewhere here, I'm going to create a client for React-Query, something like this. And then I create a const. I call it query client equals. And then I create a new query client like this. And that's, of course, the one that I imported up here. So I create the query client with the new keyword. And that is going to be stored in the const query client. All right. Then we have the provider that I imported up here. So we have to provide our application with this query client. And I do that high up here. So I'm going to do it as the first component here. Query client, query client provider. And this one takes in a prop that's called client. And I give it the query client that I created. Something like this. And then I take all of these components here and move them inside of that one. So it wraps my complete application here. And that makes sure that I can use React Query to create queries and grab data from my API. So really important, this change in version 3, you didn't have to do this before, but now you have to do this. And I think it's pretty good because then you can decide where in your application you want to have access to the query client. And they also have a provider for cache and stuff like that, but we're not going to use that in this video because that's a more advanced use, and I really don't need it for this application. So that's why. All right, we have wrapped our application with the query client, so that's good. So now we can move on, and the first component I'm going to change is this one here, is the home page. So I have a component that is called home in this application. And if we take a look here in the hooks that I created, I have this use home fetch. First, I grab something from a file that's called API. And if we take a quick look at that one, I have some functions here that fetches the data from the API. So I'm going to reuse those functions. And that means that I have to import them in my home component instead. So this one from my API, I go back to my home and I make sure that I import it there. And then from React Query, I'm going to import something that's called useInfiniteQuery. No, useInfiniteQuery, not infinity. useInfiniteQuery from React Query. And this query is used when you have an infinity scroll in your application. And that's exactly what I have here. Not an infinity scroll, but I actually load more here. So I have different pages here. So that's why I use the query that's called useInfiniteQuery. It works great in this application. Okay, then we have to start refactoring some stuff here. The hook, we're not going to need this one anymore, so I can remove that one. Then I can remove it from here. It's going to be a lot of errors here now, but I'm going to fix that later, of course. Yeah, I can remove this console log also. And then I can mark it with React Query here also to make it super clear. Then I create a const, and then I destructure out some stuff from the useInfiniteQuery. We have something that's called data, and that is one is going to hold the data that we fetch from the API. Then we have a Boolean that's called isFetching. And we actually have another Boolean that's called isLoading. IsLoading is kind of the initial load, and isFetching is a Boolean flag. That will change depending if you do any background fetching and stuff like that. So this is what I need right now because I want to show a loading spinner when I fetch more. That's why I use isFetching instead of isLoading. Then we have something that's called fetch next page and isError and has next page. These ones are new for version 3. I think it was called something else before. I don't remember it exactly now. But if you used version 2, you probably haven't seen these before. So I'm going to show you how to use them. And I'm going to remove my sidebar. And then we call the useInfiniteQuery. And I'm going to do it on another row. The first thing you have to give this query is the query key. And a query key is something that gives your query an identity. And if that query key changes, it's going to refetch the data. So I have backticks. I create a template literal. I call it movies dash. And then I also want to give it the search term, because when we do a search, we want it to fetch again. So that's why. So the movies is always going to be the same, but this one is going to change here depending on the search term. And that makes sure that every time we have a new search term, it will create a new query key and also run this function again. So that's how you tell React Query to fetch data again. You change the query key. And then we specify the function that we want to call. And in this case, it's a function from my API that fetched the movies. And I want to give it a page because that one, if we go back here to my API file, you can see that it takes in the search term and the page. So that's what I want to give this function. So back to the home. And as I want to give it some params, I create an inline arrow function because React Query is going to call this function and first give it the key and then the page. So from my API dot fetch movies, I call that function and I give it the search term and also the page. Then I have a comma. And as you can see here, I don't actually have the search term because I have to move that one also from my hook. Use home fetch. I have the search term inside of that one. So I grab this one, go back to home, and place it inside of that one instead. And of course, I also have to import use state up here. So that's essentially a state that holds the search term that the user types in up here in this one, Indiana Jones. So you can see that it grabs the Indiana Jones movies. Right, back to the code. So now I have that stayed inside of the home instead, and now it won't complain at me. And after this, you can see that I have a comma here. I can provide it with an object, and inside of this object, you can specify something that's called getNextPageParam. And this is a function that you can specify yourself that is going to give React Query the next page. So it knows how to fetch the next page. And this function can be anything that you specify. It is going to be called with the last page and the pages. So React Query always call this one and give you the last page and also an array with all the pages. In this case, you can see, for example, here in the inline functions, I didn't use the key, but you have to specify it. As this is the first param that is called, you can do it like this. You can create an underscore if you want to specify to yourself that you won't use this one. And in this case, I'm actually not going to use the pages either. I just wanted to show you this one. So in this case, I can just skip it because it's the second one. I only want the last page. And then I check if last page.page equals last page.total underscore page. And these ones are from the API. So that's why I can grab these properties here. The API will return a prop that's called total underscore page and also one that's called page. And this is how I can compare if the last page is actually the same as the total page. I know that I'm at the last page. And then I return undefined. And I have to return undefined here because React Query works that way. You have to return undefined so it knows that this is the last page. So you can't, for example, return null. That won't work. Because if you return undefined, it will specify this one here to be false. So has next page is going to be false as soon as it gets undefined. But it has to be undefined. Otherwise, I'm going to return the last page.page plus 1. So this is how we specify the next page param for the useInfiniteQuery. All right, I'm going to do some auto formatting and it will put these ones on their own row. And this is actually it. But now you can see that it complains here. So this one is going to be called isError instead, because that's the one that we destructor out is. This that we destructor out up here. And then we have to change some stuff below here. But first I want to console log out to see that I actually get some data. So I'm going to comment these ones out. And yeah, I can create a div test and save it. Go back to the application. I'm going to reload it. Yeah, and of course also I have to console log something out. So I have this data here, so I can console log out my data. Save it and go back to the application. And you can see here what we get back. So page params is going to be undefined in this case. And then we have something that's called pages. And you can see here that I get the result. And pages is an array. So it's a nested array with all the pages. So we have to consider that one when we render out our JSX. But we have the movies here and you can see total pages. And that is the one that I talked about and total results. And we also have the page here. So that's why I can calculate the next page as I did inside of this one. All right. Then we need to render out our JSX and I have to change some stuff inside of this one. So first you can see that I have here, I check the hero image. I'm going to remove the hero image when we're in a search. So instead of checking the stayed results as I did before, I can actually check if we don't have a search term and I don't want to do anything when we're fetching, because then it's going to complain because the state is going to be empty. So it won't have the data and then it will throw an error. But if I check if I don't have a search term and if I'm not fetching, I know that I hopefully have fetched some data. Otherwise, if there's an error, it will return this one instead. Okay, so I have to change some stuff here. The hero image is always going to be the first most popular movie. And before I had a single array, in this case, from the data, we have our prop that's called pages. And then I want to grab the first page. So I specify this as 0. And then I have the results 0. So this is going to grab the first page and then the first movie on that page. So I have to do this because it's a nested array. And then I have to do the same stuff here from the data.pages. I grab the first page and I grab the first result on that page. And data.pages 0, like this. And then it won't complain. And then down below here in the grid, you can see that I had a single state before with all the movies in that state. Now I have to do a nested one here instead. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm first going to check if I have any data. So data, if that one is true, I have a short circuit here. And then inside of here, from the data.pages, I'm going to do a map. I call it the group, and I have the index. And then I have an arrow function. I can make an implicit return on this one as I return JSX only. And for this one, I'm going to create a React fragment. I have to explicitly name it React fragment on this one instead of creating an empty tag because I want to have a key on this one also. And in this case, I can actually use the index as a key because they won't change. So I know that for sure. Otherwise, you shouldn't use index as a key. Then inside of this fragment, from the group, each group is going to be a page. So I can actually call it a page instead, like this. So I'm going to loop through each page. Page.results .map. And again, I can do an implicit return. So I have a movie. And then inside of here, I can grab my thumbnail. That's the same code as before. I move it inside of here like this. Yeah, this one shouldn't be a curly bracket. It should be an implicit return instead. Let's change this one. It can be a little bit nested here now. So I'm going to remove the old one here like this, and then hopefully do some auto formatting, and this will hopefully work. So what I did here is that I check if I have any data, then I loop through the actual pages. So that's why I create an empty React fragment and I give it the key with index. You shouldn't ever use the index as a key, but I can do that now because I know that these ones won't change. They will always have the same index. And then I'm going to do another map on each page, and then I show a thumbnail for each movie. All right? Then I have to change some small stuff below here also. Instead of loading, I have something that's called isFetching, and then we're going to show the spinner. And this one here, so I'm actually going to remove all this here and use the has next page if we have next page. And if we're not isFetching, then we're going to show the button load more. And instead of set is loading more, we're going to call the fetch next page like this. And we can remove this one here. So these ones are from the useInfiniteQuery. Has next page is fetching, and the fetch next page is a function that we can use from the React query library to fetch the next page. And I save this one, and hopefully it will work now. Yeah, I'm going to remove the test also that I had up here. We don't need to show that one. Save it, go back, and you can see that it grabs some data, and hopefully it will load more data, and it does. That's sweet. And that means, my friends, that we can remove this hook, use home fetch, delete it. We don't need all that code because we're using React query now. And you can see that it's, in this case, it's a little bit more complicated because I use an infinite query. So it gets a little bit more code, but it's really, really super sweet because it's much less code now. And I think it's more clean and it's a lot easier to reason about. So that's the home page. Then I'm going to change the individual movie page, because if I click on a movie here, you can see that I show some data here, and it's for each individual movie. And actually, we don't need to store anything as I did before in session storage, because it will cache everything for us. So if we go back to the home page, for example, here, home, you can see that it already have all the data, even when I load more like this. And if I choose a movie here and I go back, you can see that it have all the data here. So that's sweet. We don't have to store anything in session storage. It will cache it automatically for us. All right. So I'm going to go inside my movie component. And I have to do some stuff here also. This one is not going to be as much because I'm going to use the standard useQuery for this one. I don't need the infinite query because I'm just grabbing data on initial mount. And just as before, from my hook, I'm going to grab the API here because I have to import that one in the movie component instead. I mark it with API, paste that one in, and then I mark it with React-query. And I'm going to import the useQuery. And this is the standard query in the React query library. And I grab it from React-query. And actually, as you can see here also, I don't need to import React anymore because I'm using the latest version of the React scripts. Before, you always have to do like this, import React from React. But you don't need to do that anymore with the latest version. So that's a little pro tip you can use here. If you use the latest version of Create React App, you don't have to do this. But I'm actually quite used to having it, so it feels a little bit strange not having that one at the top. Anyways, okay, we have imported the useQuery. So down below here in the component itself, first I can actually remove this hook. We don't need it. And here I'm going to remove the hook call. And then for this one, if we look inside of the hook itself, you can see that I have a function here that actually fetches from 2 endpoints. So I need this function for this one. So I'm going to take this one here, everything here. I'm going to copy it, go back to my movie component, and up here, just above the component itself, I can remove some stuff inside of here because I don't need to set any states. And this try block here, I don't need these ones. And this one is going to be async still, and it's going to take in the movie ID. And then instead of setting the states, I'm going to refactor this a bit. I'm going to return something here instead. So I return, first I spread out the old movie state. And then for the actors, I'm going to grab the credits.cast. And this one is from my course. I won't explain everything inside of here. That's not important. The important stuff is to know that you need to have what they call a thenable function or an async function that will return something to the useQuery. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm grabbing something from the API, and then I return an object here with the data for React query, and then I return the directors like this. So there's the function that I'm going to use for React query. Down below here, I mark it with React-query. Then I'm going to remove the sidebar again. From the const, I destructure out the data, and in this case, I'm going to rename it to movie. So I do that with a colon and what I want to name it to. I'm going to use the isLoading and the isError on this one. And I call the useQuery hook. First, I give it the movie ID as a key, the query key. And then I give it an inline function, and I call my getMovie function, and I give it the movie ID like this. It's not called getMovie, fetchMovie. All right, I'm going to rename it to getMovie instead, like this. So this will hopefully grab the data for us. And this one is going to be called isLoading instead. And this one is going to be called isError. And this one should work down below there. And that's because I renamed it to movie. I have already specified it as movie down below here. So that's why I renamed the data. Okay, save the file. I'm also going to remove this hook here. So I remove the complete folder like this. Then I go back to my application and I click a movie here. And you can see that it fetches data for me. And that's super sweet. That's how easy it was to refactor that one. So if I click on this one and I go back to the same again, you can see that it has cached the data, so you don't have to fetch the data again. So that's sweet. That's how you refactor this application into using React query. And I think it looks pretty sweet here. You just have this one hook and you get everything, the loading states and the arrow states, and you get the data. So that's super great. I really love React query, and I think it has changed a lot in the React world. All right, if you like this video, please subscribe and support my channel. I constantly put up videos like this on my channel, and I especially love React and creating React videos. So hopefully I see you in another one.